December 24th, 1914. The Western Front, Flanders, Belgium. In the frozen mud between two lines of barbed wire, over 100,000 men huddle in trenches barely 6 feet deep. They are soaked, freezing, and exhausted. Many have been fighting for 5 months straight. Some are teenagers. Most will not survive the war. But on this night, Christmas Eve, something impossible is about to happen. Something that will never be repeated. Something their generals will try to erase from history. This is the story of the Christmas Truce, the day enemies became brothers, and the day the old world died. To understand what happened on Christmas 1914, you need to understand what the war had already done to these men. When the Great War began in August 1914, everyone thought it would be over by Christmas. Soldiers marched off with flowers in their rifles. Crowds cheered. Kings promised glory. But by December, the Western Front had become a 450-mile scar across Europe. From the English Channel to the Swiss border, millions of men faced each other across a strip of devastated earth called no man's land. The trenches were medieval in their horror. Rats the size of cats, lice, trench foot, dysentery. Men slept standing up in freezing water. The smell of death was everywhere. And yet, these men were not warriors by nature. Most were farmers, teachers, factory workers, conscripts, and volunteers. Boys who'd been told they were fighting for civilization itself. On the other side of no man's land, the enemy was equally miserable, equally human, equally tired of war. By late December, both sides had been ordered to hold their positions through the winter. There would be no victory by Christmas, no end in sight, just cold and mud and the distant thud of artillery. And then something unexpected began to happen. December 24th, Christmas Eve. Along the British and German lines near Ypres, Belgium, the weather had turned bitterly cold. A light frost hardened the mud. For the first time in weeks, the ground wasn't a swamp. The Germans had been receiving care packages from home. Chocolate, sausages, small Christmas trees called Tannenbaums, sent by the Kaiser's wife. As darkness fell, something strange began to happen along the German trenches. Candles appeared, tiny flames flickering along the parapets. Then voices. The Germans began to sing. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. Silent Night. British soldier Alfred Anderson, age 18, would later recall, "We heard them singing. We didn't know what to do. Then someone on our side started singing back." Within minutes, soldiers on both sides were singing Christmas carols, in different languages, but the same melodies. Silent Night. O come all ye faithful. Adeste Fidelis. Across no man's land, the sound of human voices replaced the sound of gunfire. One British officer wrote in his diary, "It was one of the most extraordinary things I have ever witnessed. The guns stopped. The war stopped. And for a moment, we were just men again." On Christmas morning, the impossible happened. At dawn, a German soldier stood up, unarmed, and stepped into no man's land. His name was never recorded, but his courage changed everything. He waved, he shouted "Merry Christmas" in broken English. On the British side, a young lieutenant stood up, against every order, against every instinct, and waved back. Within an hour, hundreds of men from both sides had climbed out of their trenches and walked into no man's land. They shook hands. They exchanged cigarettes, chocolate, buttons from their uniforms. They showed each other photos of wives, girlfriends, children. Some buried their dead together. Others played football, soccer, using helmets as goalposts. A soldier named Ernie Williams later said, "I played football with a man who, the day before, I'd been trying to kill." Language barriers didn't matter. They spoke in gestures, in smiles, in shared humanity. One German officer gave a British captain a bottle of wine. The captain gave him a tin of bully beef. They toasted each other, laughed. For a few hours, the war ceased to exist. But this wasn't a universal truce. In some sectors, the fighting never stopped. In others, officers on both sides suppressed it immediately. But in the quiet zones near Ypres, Armentières, and the Ploegsteert Wood, something miraculous unfolded. It's estimated that up to 100,000 men participated in spontaneous ceasefires along the Western Front that Christmas. A German soldier named Richard Sherman wrote, "We realized that we were not enemies. We were just young men, far from home, and we all wanted the same thing, to survive." But the generals were not pleased. Not everyone was happy. Many junior officers allowed the truce to happen. They were young, exhausted, and privately horrified by the war. For them, Christmas was a moment of sanity. But the High Command was furious. British General Sir Horace Smith-Dorrien issued an order on December 26th. This is only illustrative of the apathy which exists among some of our junior officers. Any such conduct must cease immediately. The Germans were equally alarmed. The Kaiser's generals saw the truce as a breakdown of discipline. Fraternization with the enemy was treason. Why did they care so much? Because the truce exposed a dangerous truth. The soldiers didn't hate each other. The war required hatred. It required dehumanization. The enemy had to be a monster. But on Christmas Day, 1914, soldiers from both sides realized they were fighting men just like themselves. And that realization was more dangerous than any weapon. One British captain wrote, "If we keep talking to them, how can we keep killing them?" That question terrified the generals. By December 26, the orders were clear. The truce must end. Soldiers were rotated out. Officers who'd allowed fraternization were quietly reassigned. In some sectors, artillery fire resumed on December 26 to restore fighting spirit. The war machine needed to keep turning. By the morning of December 26th, the war resumed. Some sectors fired warning shots first, deliberately missing, to give the other side time to get back into their trenches. Others resumed fighting immediately. A German soldier named Kurt Zamisch wrote in his diary, "Yesterday we played football together. Today we are shooting at each other again. It is madness. It is unbearable. But orders are orders." The Christmas truce never happened again. By 1915, both sides had hardened. New tactics, more poison gas, more artillery. The Western Front became a machine of industrial slaughter. But the men who experienced the truce never forgot. Years later, survivors on both sides would speak of it as the most important day of their lives. Not because it ended the war, but because it proved that even in hell, humanity could break through. Many of them would die in the years that followed, at the Somme, at Verdun, at Passchendaele. But for one day of Christmas 1914, they had been free. Free from generals, free from governments, free from war. They had chosen peace. And for that, they were punished. After the war, the Christmas truce was largely forgotten or suppressed. Official war histories barely mentioned it. Generals dismissed it as a minor curiosity. Governments didn't want citizens to know that soldiers from both sides had refused to fight. But the men who were there never stopped talking about it. In the 1960s and 70s, as the last survivors aged, they began giving interviews. Newspapers published their letters. Historians started digging. And the story came back to life. Today, the Christmas truce is one of the most famous moments of World War I. It has inspired books, films, songs, and memorials. In 1999, a monument was erected in Ploegsteert, Belgium, near where some of the truces occurred. It shows a British and German soldier shaking hands. The inscription reads, 1914, the Christmas truce, lest we forget. But what does it mean? Some see it as proof of the innate goodness of humanity. Others see it as a tragedy, proof that wars are fought by ordinary people who have no reason to hate each other. Both are true. The Christmas truce was not a victory, it was a rebellion. A quiet, beautiful rebellion against the logic of war. It didn't stop the killing, but it proved that even in the worst circumstances, human beings can choose compassion over violence. And perhaps that's the real lesson. Not that war can be stopped by goodwill alone, but that the spirit of peace never truly dies, even in the trenches. On December 24th, 1914, something impossible happened. Thousands of soldiers, hardened, exhausted, far from home, chose to be human. They climbed out of their trenches. They crossed no man's land. They sang, they played, they talked. And for one day, the war stopped. It didn't last. It couldn't. The forces that drove the war were too powerful. The hatred, the nationalism, the propaganda, all of it came roaring back. But the truce happened, and it mattered, because it reminds us that war is not natural. Hatred is not inevitable. Soldiers are not machines. They are people, just like us. And when given the choice, even in the middle of hell, they chose peace. The Christmas truce was never allowed to happen again. Officers made sure of that, but the memory survives, in letters, in diaries, in the stories passed down through generations. And every Christmas, we remember the men who laid down their rifles, walked into no man's land, and proved that humanity is stronger than war, even if only for a day. This has been the story of the Christmas truce of 1914. Lest we forget.